Chavi, welcome. Right. Um, so I think I can sort of begin, so welcome everybody to our event today, which is a roundtable with leadership and founders from a range of youth-led organizations, and we'll be discussing the challenges and opportunities in this space. And before we begin the session, I think I'd like to give a bit of background to the network and how we started Rethinking Economics India. So Rethinking Economics is a global network of students, teachers, and professionals looking to change the way economics functions in society in the classroom. We're really a student-inspired movement that emerged after a series of independent protests in economics departments across the world after the 2008 financial crisis that came together, and we're now present in about 30 countries and more than 100 universities across the world. The founding principles of the movement, as derived from the ISITE open letter, are that economics needs to be methodologically diverse, especially when current views allow it to masquerade as a science. The pluralism of theory, where economics need to be understood as is, as a landscape of continued engagement and contrasting opinions, and not positioning the neoclassical view as the supreme prescription of a series of white men. The third is interdisciplinarity, that economics needs to learn from and listen to other social sciences, simply because more often than not, they share an object of study in human behavior. So the Rethinking Economics India Network really emerged in the early phase of the current pandemic with very much these same concerns, and was becoming apparent that a new world would need new economic principles at its core. And today we celebrate a year into the network, and I have to say, sort of, as founder, I never quite expected this to turn out as it has. And I speak for the rest of the leadership team, I think, when I say that it's been a unique journey in being surprised by the commitment and enthusiasm of new volunteers, and in learning how to navigate as we transition into a more sort of formal style of organization in next year. And the goal of today's discussion is to come together and learn from other people on this journey. And with respect to this, I'd like to say a few more things that are helping to guide our thinking on where to go from here. So first, I would say sort of one of our early concerns of the network was how we can inspire people to action, and was on the basis of one of our first teams to start operations around a sort of platform for leadership. And as a result, this year, we welcome our first student chapter at JNU, and hopefully more to come soon. Since then, we've done a lot more events and other activities, and also embarked on a fair number of new projects, but the core effort of trying to get new people to organize in this space has not shifted. Second, more and more, we're also realizing that this movement cannot only be for students and economists. The ideas that we discuss are crucial to be understood, not only in the pursuit of a new economics, but in the pursuit of a new narrative about the economy, one that's human-centered and that everyday person can feel ownership towards bringing to life. And third, the movement building for us has also been about bringing together different players for collaborative efforts, an example of which is the Diversity in Academia report, which we launched together with a couple of other organizations, Bahujan Economics included, and where the team is working on a second iteration of that. And in this kind of collaborative kind of action is where we're building an ecosystem around particular issues, where I think we're starting to find our place. And in the long term, as we try to be more strategic about our impact, I think this will be an important guiding principle for us. And that's where we start this session today. So I'm going to quickly go over the format for the discussion. A short opening statement will be covered by each of the speakers on their journey so far, after which we'll engage in a little bit more deeply on what has been said. I'd also like to invite attendees to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll pick on them as we can. So with all that said, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, a really exciting bunch of people that represent sort of different perspectives. We are joined by Neha Butch, who is the director at Prava, a Delhi-based nonprofit that works on adolescent and youth development and youth-centric development, and is on the board of several youth-led organizations. We have Ignacio Silva, the director of the Economics Policy Observatory in Chile, a group member of the America Soy, an awesome team that we're now engaging with on a new project. And he's also a current student, the Master of International Economics at the Berlin School of Economics and Law. We also have with us today Vandita Murarka, who is the founder and CEO at One Future Collective, and is a human rights lawyer, rights-based strategy consultant, and a feminist researcher. I'm also happy to welcome Arushi Kalra, who is a PhD student at Brown and a founding team member at Bahujan Economics, an organization we have engaged with closely over the last year, and her research work is focused on areas in politics and development economies. Last but not least, joining us as a speaker, Seho Putu, an aspiring economist who has been at Rethinking Economics for Africa for 3 years and was recently elected to the Rethinking Economics International Members Council and is a current master's student at Trinity College Dublin. Again, happy to have all of you here with us here today. And I'd like to start with Arushi to open up the floor in a discussion for us and give us a bit of a background on your organization and journey.
Thank you so much, Karan. Thank you for the kind introduction as well. I'm very happy to be here and sharing this panel with such amazing people. So perhaps I can begin by introducing the organization that I'm representing today. Bahujan Economists is a platform that aims not only to improve representation of underrepresented and disadvantaged caste communities in the field of economics, but also to introduce a viewpoint that we thought has been missing in mainstream economic thought. The organization came into existence essentially on account of collective experiences of students from these backgrounds in institutions of higher learning across India. These experiences include everyday forms of discrimination, harassment, and exclusion at the hands of fellow students and even faculty. This really got us thinking about ways of providing support and mentorship to students that come from these communities. And I think it is worth emphasizing that this is the kind of support and mentorship that students from privileged communities have always taken for granted. And we seek to highlight that as well. So in this process, we provide a platform for students from the community to build capacities through discussing how to, for instance, get into master's and PhD programs of their choice, how to find the right RShips, how to find the right jobs, how to find the right pre-doc positions, for instance. And we also build capacity through organizing workshops in, for instance, Python and Stata. Finally, we aim to build a community that introduces the viewpoint of these caste groups into economic thought. One example of how we are doing this currently is by inviting workers from different occupation groups to talk about differential access to healthcare on account of their caste during the second and very unfortunate wave of the deadly coronavirus in India. We also seek to amplify their voices and hear their perspective on what is not being talked about by the social scientists in this situation, which is the economic crisis spurred by the loss of jobs and livelihoods on account of lockdowns imposed to curb the spread of the virus. So we think it's important to essentially amplify these voices in order to bring this perspective on not just differential access to healthcare, which people were able to access on account of their social capital, but also what has been the economic impact of on different caste groups due to different occupations. So I guess I will leave follow-up questions about how we came to be and what are the challenges and what I've learned in this journey for follow-up questions. And thank you so much. And I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here, Arushi. And we can now maybe move to Vandita. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Arushi. That's so powerful. I have to say I've followed your work for a while and I really enjoy it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about why One Future Collective started. And hopefully that'll tell you a little bit about what we do and who we are. I was 18 and I used to lead this group of 120 volunteers that did a bunch of like after school programs in Bombay. And just a trigger warning of domestic violence. I remember one day I went back to this community after a month and this 6-year-old girl who was one of my favorites, right? Like she comes running up to me, she's happy. And she's just like, I haven't seen you in such a long time. How have you been? And then she tells me she has a new mother. My initial response is, okay, maybe there was a second marriage, there was a third marriage. But she tells me that her mother was pregnant. She faced domestic violence. And the family chose to not take her to the hospital because what would happen to the man? And Nair Hospital, this is the slum behind Maratha Mandir. So Nair Hospital, one of the biggest hospitals, is like walking distance from there, right? And it was just not even a consideration. They said we prioritize the safety of the man who's the breadwinner in the family over the fact that she maybe needed some medical care, and this happens. This happens quite frequently. What really stuck out for me was the young girl told me this like while she was smiling. She told me this very normally, like this was an everyday occurrence in her world, right? Whenever I think about like a pivotal point in my life about why I do what I do, I go back to that day and I'm just struck by how normalized grief can be for people so young. That day was also very triggering for me because it made me like come face to face with a lot of domestic violence I had seen and experienced in my own house, by my father, otherwise. As I like grew a little older, right, like exit from that situation to about a year later, I remember joining a human rights organization thinking this is how I'm going to change the world. Like I'm going to make sure what happened to me does not happen to anybody else, etc., etc. I was sexually harassed at this workplace, and I had to continue to work there because I needed money. And that's why I share this example when I talk about these issues here, right? Later on, I went on to work with a bunch of other nonprofits, a bunch of other organizations, and I realized a couple of things. I realized that we've become so obsessed with ensuring that we as an organization sustain, that this artificial entity remains, that we forget that our success is when we're not needed anymore. So we forgot that. These organizations have become corporatized, like they've become like corporate organizations, but who said that was a good model? So that's not necessarily a good model to import into this sector, right? And then third, that really stood out for me was how centralized hierarchy and power was. And that's not why I came here. I trained to be a lawyer. I was going to be a lawyer that made a lot of money, but then I decided to be a human rights lawyer who doesn't make enough money. And then I realized that this is not what I want to do with my life. I want to work on these issues, but I want to think about, are we solving for causes? Are we solving for consequences? Is the work we do enabling communities to hold and build power, to sustain and lead change even after we exit, right? How are we transforming the interpersonal relationships within micro communities and between different micro communities as well? And that's why One Future Collective started. So we started about 3 years back in 2017. And we started with a very simple, very idealistic vision, right? Really young group across different identities. We said, we want a world built on social justice, not even fully understanding what that term means. And then a year later, we added an addendum to it saying, we want this world to be led by communities of care. We want a world where mutual aid, interdependence is the norm and it's not an anomaly. And now that's what our vision is. So what we do at One Future Collective is basically, we do knowledge, advocacy, and community building work that leads to social justice. And a key part of that is developing and sustaining communities of care, which sort of become like these new age families that are differentiated from biological families, but they create a culture of caregiving, of mutual aid, and otherwise. I'm going to take a minute to share why this is so important for me to discuss on this panel. This roundtable, it's because, whenever we talk about gender-based violence, we talk about mental health, we talk about a lot of things that address the consequence, but a lot of things that are very deeply rooted in economics would actually prevent it. Like if I asked you, would you think housing can prevent gender-based violence? I was talking to someone 2 days back and they said, oh no, how is that even linked? They wanted to work on access to justice. And that's great, but if I had affordable housing, I know that in the pandemic, I could have helped survivors find a place to live that they could afford. Do I need therapy if work is making me work for 18 hours a day and what I actually need is sleep, right? So is that hustle culture creating a space where my economic sustenance is dependent on the fact that I put myself through the rigors of a culture that do not sustain me? So yes, in this haphazard storytelling way, this is what we do. We do things with a lot more method than I tell my stories, but I want you to know that the work we do is very rooted in how do we build people power to advocate, organize, and mobilize for change and action at different levels, starting from the very interpersonal, right? How do you decolonize yourself? How do you do that in your house? How do you change your dynamic with yourself, with your families, with your friends? And then how do you take responsibility for leading that change in your communities? Not just like, don't just think of a legal system. We even work with like housing societies. We work with college clubs. What are different groups that you can collectivize to transform? Yes, so that is the work we do. Very happy to answer other questions in a bit.
Thank you, Vandita. I think that was very illustrative. And I'd now like to pass to Neha. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Always lovely to hear people like Arushi and Vandita, and then of course then to go next, and then you feel like, oh God. But I think similar to Vandita, I'm also going to just share I think a story, because when I talk about Prabha, in a lot of ways I am a product of Prabha. So when we talk about impact stories, I am one of those impact stories, and Prabha for me was was and is a safe space. It's been my space. It's been a space that I found for myself when I was 17, just going on 18. When I got to college, having felt like a misfit all through my life in school, trying to find these new experiences, trying to find a space to belong to, trying to find new experiences. So wanting a lot of change, and then being really scared about wanting all of this change because didn't really know where I was going to be heading and how to go about doing this. And when I landed up in a Prabha workshop, just some key things that happened, which got me embedded in Prabha. The first was when I went for my first workshop. There were around about 200 people, and Ashraf, who's one of the founders of Prabha, co-founders of Prabha, she followed me out. And she said, really enjoyed having you in this space. Will you come back? And I was like, 200 people. There were 200 young people there. Maybe 20 of them were old. The rest were all new. She came out and she said this to me. And I felt like I was seen, just being valued, just being seen, just somebody believing in me when I didn't really have a clue what I was doing in life, made me go back. And then finding spaces where I had perspectives and beliefs. Like I was very pro-dam when I was 18, and so every space I went into, I would get shut down, because any development space you went into and you said pro-dam, everybody would be like, what are you saying? Get out, you don't know your shit. Sorry, shouldn't have cursed, but but here was a space where when I said it, Rajneesh, who was my facilitator then, told me, okay, why don't you bring some perspectives? Where are you basing this on? What are you thinking about this? What do you think is happening? And I got challenged. So I was heard, and then I was pushed to say, okay, let's back this up. Let's talk about it. Let's have a dialogue. And then I was said, okay, do you want to go out and volunteer? Do you want to see for yourself? So do you want to go to Narmada Bachao Andolan and experience it? And I landed up there. And I found that my entire worldview just sort of started shaking. It literally was a feeling like your earth and the carpet being pulled out of under your feet, because everything that I believed in, I started to question. And at the age of 18, 19, 20, to suddenly feel like everything you built was shaking was a very hard thing to go through, but was also much needed. And so it pushed me to change my perspectives. It pushed me to change my worldview. It pushed me to start asking questions, rather than just taking things for granted. And once you start asking questions, it's a little bit like going down the rabbit hole, in Alice the Wonderland, because once you start, you can't stop, because you start seeing everything that starts to emerge. So really the ability to see all of this. And along the way, I found and made friends with people who I would not have otherwise ever come across, because my trajectory of my life would have been very different. And even if our paths would have crossed, in all likelihood, I would not have perhaps seen them, because I was just not looking. I was not being aware. I was not really engaging. And like Arushi talked about, how you can take privilege for granted. And that was me. That was me at that age, and all of these processes made me realize I had all of these privileges, and started making me question them and make me feel very discontented about it. And then finding the tools and finding, that the processes helped me build these capacities to start acting on them and saying, listen, buddy, you're not a spectator. It's not okay to say you can sit on the sidelines. You're an actor. So you've got to also act, and you've got to take stances, and it won't always be easy, and there will be conflicts, and you'll have to go out and have those dialogues, and you need to learn how to do that. And you'll make mistakes, and you can't just reflect. You have to act and reflect and do both. So all of this actually what has kept me here for over 20 years. So, you know, I entered maybe in 99 or 2000 and we are sitting in 2021. So it's been that long a journey. Part of it was as a volunteer and part of it has been as a staff member. But that DNA of creating such safe, democratic spaces where young people are seen, heard, challenged, pushed to sort of learn how to think for themselves, learn how to do that with empathy, learn how to build relationships across boundaries, and then be able to take actions and stances with courage and compassion. Are all things that I learned when I was a volunteer, which set me up, and I'm still learning them. I still won't say that I've arrived, but that's also something that over 28-year history of Prava, you know, Prava as an organization is 28 years old, has passed on and hasn't changed, though many other things have changed. And with that belief, that belief in the agency and the power of young people to be able to lead processes for systems change. In a way, like I said, which is empathetic and courageous, which is inside out, which, like Vandita talked about, is looking at inclusion and interdependence, is not looking at competitiveness, and there is an awareness and there is a belief in insaniyat at the end of it, which drives it, has been the kernel of what Prava does. And for us, I think the vision is that, because the catalyst for how Prava started was the demolition of Babri Masjid. When that happened and how the responses went, the idea of, the need for young people to understand conflicts, to understand diversity, to understand differences and inequity and injustice, and be able to come to the table, to work in a preventive way, to understand and co-create. Looking at conflicts as opportunities to understand more deeply and co-create something, rather than for it to just polarize and sort of walk away from it, to take responsibility, to take ownership and make the change happen. And that continues to happen till today. And imagine if there was a generation of people, heterogeneous young people across all the different identities that you can think of, who had the capacities, the support, the systemic support to be able to do this, the world would look completely different. And Prava as an organization would not need to exist. And that really is the vision, that, can we embed this in every space that young people are part of? Can we stop looking at young people as demographic dividends and hands and feet for our GDP, but start to invest in them as people who can just transform the way the world can be, with those constitutional values that we talk about all the time, but really bringing them to life is really the work that we do, this preventive psychosocial work to build leadership for social change with young people, by directly nurturing young people, but also by strengthening youth engaging, youth-led organizations and co-creating social change. So direct as well as ecosystem building and influencing work. That is us, was true for Nitin, one of the first young people who went through the workshop prior to Prava starting, because he was the first guy who gave feedback and I think made the co-founders feel like maybe there is a need for an organization, because he told them after the first workshop saying, I think I want to go back and talk to my parents about why they gave out sweets after the Sikh riots. I don't agree with it, and I want to have a dialogue and understand and challenge them on it. And I think it happened to me, and I'm hoping it will happen to the youngest person who's going to walk through now the Zoom doors for the time being of any of the Prava workshops. Okay? So that's me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha. And yes, Ignacio, would you like to go next?
Okay, hi. First of all, thank you for the invitation and congratulations for this amazing event. And of course, we really like the job that you're doing in Rethinking Economics India. We're enjoyed to work with you. So first of all, I am from Chile, and I am representing an organization in Chile called the Observatory of Economic Policy, OPES, the Observatorio de Políticas Económicas. And maybe to understand why we developed this group, it's important to think about what is the Chilean context. So in the beginning, we thought and we see when we started to study economics that the public debate in the economic area is very narrow. The country is very well known because because of this experiment, one of the first experiment in the neoliberalism policies, and after a few decades after that, we still see how a lot of other countries move to another direction, but it's not the case of Chile, at least until now. And this is something exciting that is happening now. So in this way, all the public policies that we have and the economic policy that we have in Chile is reproducing all the same system. We have experienced this kind of privatization that includes all, even like the privatization of the water. So the water of the river is something that we have, and is even one of the most extremely cases where the farmers in the north of Chile doesn't have enough water to rise their own, the farmers. Also, we have an extremely flexibilized labor market. So even though we have this like in the economic area, we have like this good evaluated policy that we have in the macroeconomic stability. Even the World Bank and the IMF, they talk about how at least until a few years ago, they talk about how we have been like we have implemented a very successful policies, and even some part of Latin America seems or look at Chile as an example until now. So when we were studying economics, we realized that we need a platform to organize this kind of discussion. We feel like it was important, and we want to elaborate into the public discussion. So we started to meet together some people who were ending our studies, and we started to discuss, and we started to produce some working papers, but working papers that were focused on the public discussion. For example, one of the first one was how to reduce or how to produce a reform to reduce the working hours. So we also realized that we need to democratize the economic debate. We don't want to still discussing economics with the same people, with the same economists that has this very narrow view of how to do economic policy. And of course, they are mostly men. And we want to do something bigger, more inclusive. We prepare material to explain this kind of economics. We also did some workshop on economics and feminist economics only for women, because of what I said is they are more excluded from the discussion. In this sense, to democratize the economics, we have done a few interesting things for us. We did our first book that called the 38 figures that define Chile, with the objective to put the debate and try to explain to the people how we feel, how we understand the economic result of the Chilean experience. So we have this book. It's in Spanish, so it's the 38 cifras que definen Chile. So we wanted to do something colorful and easy to understand with our approach to understand the economic result of the Chilean economy. We also have a podcast called it Que se acabe la economía, that economics end. So this is where we are now, and we have some challenge from the future, especially with the things that they're happening in Chile now, that maybe we can discuss in the next round. So thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Very cool, especially on the book. And we're now on to Tseho. Would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be joining you. I just remember last year when Rethinking Economics India was starting, and just getting the email about anyone who'd like to connect from Africa, and just making those initial connections. So it's really, really good to
Yeah, I think you need to unmute again.
Okay, Did the whole thing, was the whole thing muted?
No, I think just after you said the 1 year, you remember last year and
Okay.
first connection.
Yeah, so I was saying, I remember last year when you started and you asked for a connection from Africa and how far you've come right now. It's really exciting to see, and congratulations. I think after this first year, there's only like, you're only going to thrive from there. So congratulations for that. Thank you for this invite. So my name is Zoho, and I've been in Rethinking Economics for Africa for the last 3 years. And Rethinking Economics for Africa is a student-led organization that works with NGOs and students, of course, academia, and is trying to rethink the curriculum, the economics curriculum in our university. We're trying to centralize African issues in our curriculum and Africa, right? And the context behind Rethinking, or REFA, is what I'm going to call it, the context behind it is protests and movement action on South African universities during 2015 and 2016. At UCT specifically, we had a statue of Cecil John Rhodes. I'm not sure if everyone knows about his history or context, but he was a colonialist and a white supremacist, that he is said to have donated the land that the university is built on. And so there was a big statue of Cecil John Rhodes on our campus until 2016. And to Africans, or like native Africans, Cecil John Rhodes is representative of someone who was like genocidal and wanted to and stole our land, so, and was just, he has a very problematic history. And to have his statue just represented colonial violence, essentially, that just permeated through the years, right? And asking for this removal of the statue was the beginning stages of people across all campuses in South Africa looking at the coloniality of universities, the coloniality of university residences, the coloniality of the university syllabus in itself. And that's when we also had decolonized economics, which was more institutionalized at WITS, became institutionalized at WITS, when comrades there connected with the larger Rethinking Economics Network. So that was the trajectory that it took us to start REFA. Just this opening of the colonial that kind of opened the question of coloniality everywhere. And so as we've been looking in our syllabus as students, we've seen that it's not helping us to answer the questions of development in Africa, right? We have these economic tools, but they're not helping us to move our society forward. A few panelists spoke about how the system keeps on reproducing itself, right? But that might be because the tools that we've been given are so westernized. So this is what REFA is doing right now. It's trying to locate and centralize Africa in African economics so that we're able to solve African issues. And we're starting at school, where most economists are trained. As I think we all know, a lot of the economic syllabus is geared towards the quantitative aspects, that is looking at like the monetary and the fiscal aspects of the economy, and really just overlooks the people and people's participation in the economy. And that seems to be the work that we are being taught at school right now. And what we want to do is bring back the people, centralize people in the economy, centralize different kinds of thinking. So heterodox economic thought as well, and also expand access to economic thought. So our approach is to have started at university level, but we have been very lucky over the years. So we have had some experience, and I think it's been 4 or 5 years of REFA, that we've been able to connect with civil society and at large, right, which has really helped us to continue the work that we do, and also has helped us to expand its reach. So every year we have big festival, and that's our that's one of our biggest, like that's where we dedicate a lot of our work. It's the Rethinking Economics for Africa Festival, where we invite trade unionists, anthropologists, so people across the social science, members of the public, economic students, academics, and just thinkers and activists to all congregate and to contribute ideas on the economy and how we can rethink it together. So making sure that it's interdisciplinary and that the public, like people who are usually excluded from like intellectual discussions in the ivory tower, become part of these discussions. So that's a way that we are using this platform to make impact at the moment. We want to go on to doing curriculum reform, right? But I think as rethinkers, it's a big challenge for us because of the way that the world is calibrated. It keeps on reproducing itself, this quantitative and very like one-sided neoclassical economics replicates itself because workplaces give universities like a spec of what they expect from students essentially. And what we see from that is that they're asking for the same kind of skills like the quantitative ones, and they really have no concern of how society works in general. So it's like path dependent. So you have companies and businesses that are setting the agenda for one kind of economics to be taught. And then you have also like publications and different kinds of institutionalized economics dispensers of knowledge who also advocate for one kind of knowledge, right? So we as rethinkers have a very big task when asking for rethinking to happen, for all of these different systems to change in themselves, and it's a very large task. So I think on an international level, that's a challenge for us, but also ourselves as rethinkers in South Africa, that's something that is also a challenge, just trying to convince thinking, the change in thinking, institutional change, and also because it's so much bigger than us, right? That's a big challenge of ours. But that's where we're moving towards curriculum change. But over the last 4 or 5 years, what we have been doing is working on the ground and working on bringing people together to start having these discussions on economics and why it needs to be rethought, and bringing up the issue, which I think has been overlooked in the past or hasn't been spoken up about. So yeah, the last few years for us has been groundwork and bringing in different allies to amplify our voice. And yeah, I think it's been going really well for us, and we're very excited to take it to the next level. Yeah.
Thank you, Soho. I think there was a bit of internet issues on the end, but we heard everything. I think everyone heard everything. But yes. So yes, thank you for all the speakers also for setting that context. And I think I'd like to start the discussion by talking about community, because I think it's something that everyone mentioned. And maybe we can start with Neha and Vandita, really on the role of safe spaces and what that looks like. So I mean, in terms of curating those communities and the process of building that system, what do you think are the most important things in creating those communities that can accommodate safe spaces and perpetuate them, as opposed to sort of having them as isolated events? And maybe we can start with Vandita and then pass it over to Neha. Yeah.
Thank you, Karan. Again, please ignore the construction noise. So I want to think a little bit about what safe in a space really means, right? I think over time, safe has become synonymous for comfortable. And I want to make that distinction that what is a safe space for many will be an uncomfortable space for others, especially if you're someone who's in a position of an oppressor, right? So that is eventually going to happen. And if you do think of yourself as an ally or you want to be on a learning journey, you have to learn to sit with the discomfort and allow yourself to learn through that. So just like one disclaimer before I start off, I won't say I hold expertise in saying what are the elements of a safe space, right? But I can tell you a little bit about one, what makes a safe space for me or for people at One Future Collective. And second, how do we make sure that it's not, like Karan said, it's not a one-off event and then you go away and then you come back for another event. I think for us at OFC, in terms of a safe space, one thing is very clearly putting everything on an agenda, right? Like very specifically calling out things. Often a lot of underlying tension, conflict, etc., is ignored or it's dealt with without it ever being made an agenda item. And for us, it's really important that it's part of the agenda, that there is a pre-existing consensus-based conflict resolution mechanism. We have some basic guidelines which are like, you don't violate that, right? So like basic anti-sexual harassment, bullying, unfair treatment, etc. So we put in place certain basic clauses, and then we build off that, and we try not to put rules in a space, but we put values. So we say, okay, these are our core values of how this space will be held and facilitated. And it's never, these are my 5 values and now everyone has to follow it. It's a proposal that, okay, these are 6, 7 values that we believe in. These are what these values look like in action. And we always spend some time rejigging and re-looking at these values from what the lens of that community, which is in that space, then thinks of those values and what they look like in action, right? Like it's very easy to say we're an empathetic space, but what does an empathetic space mean in action? What does it mean when we say we're accountable? Or what does it mean when we say we're intersectional? What does that mean in terms of actual practice and not just like using words loosely? So I think that is one process-oriented thing that we do. Something that I'm learning more and more, and it's not a perfect thing. I do a lot of work with survivors of gender, sexual orientation, etc. related violence. And I'm moving towards a lot of work in alternative and restorative justice. And to think about how we can apply those practices to our spaces. How can we apply tools of transformative justice to our spaces? So small things, and I know it seems really small, but do we know how to give a good apology? Like when was the last time you gave an apology where the other person felt really hurt and understood, and they actually felt like they would apologize too? And it wasn't just like, if you're feeling bad, I'm sorry, right? Like that's like moving away from that. Do we know how to distinguish between harm, abuse, and conflict? And if we can't make those distinctions, then do we even know how to proceed with that? So like making those distinctions, holding space for accountability, holding space for repair of trust, for repair of harm, for correction of these things in these spaces as well. I think for me, that is what makes a safe space. I'm wary of spaces that say nothing bad will ever happen here, or we will never go wrong, or it'll be comfortable for everyone. Because one, you're not growing if it's so comfortable. Then it's like you just chat with your friends, it's the same thing. And second is, how can you make these promises? Because that means then you're not creating space for a lot of different people to show up. And you are then saying, okay, my type of person or someone who leans on my political side will definitely be a safe person. I don't think we can take those guarantees for anyone. I think this is the sort of thing that leads to a lot of us being gaslit and to having our voices subdued, right? Because how could that person ever bully you? Or how could that person be racist? I'll give you an example. I'm a part of this really prestigious program where the facilitators speak very slowly when they speak to Indians. And I had to put it down in my feedback that that's racist. Do you think I don't understand English when you speak fast? Such a small thing, right? So this is how we create spaces. Our spaces are co-owned. So we are nobody to like facilitate a space, right? We hold spaces and participants hold it together. What we've done over time to make sure these are not one-off events is to link these events into larger directions. So we have larger strategic goals in terms of where our organization works. 3 larger strategic goals of mobilizing young people, organizing, mobilizing young people, ensuring that specific groups have access to safety, health, and well-being, And the third is, how do you embed social justice in interpersonal relationships? And then whatever spaces we hold within these three strategic goals, we ensure that we have a plan for these communities to continue to engage with each other offline. That is when the space is not there. And to be able to co-lead and own spaces and create more spaces. We shouldn't be the center of them forming community relationships. In fact, it's more beautiful if they can do it themselves. So I think that's what we do. Procedurally, we have like someone who manages the community. We actually invest in community. We prioritize their needs. So small things like we came out with interest-free loan system during COVID for our community members, not just for our team, for vaccination drives, for free therapy. So a bunch of those things, right? So those are like other community building mechanisms, because you need that sort of support system as well. Yeah. Neha, do you want to take over?
Thanks, Vandita. I think you covered quite a bit, and I think I'll just build from there. And I'm speaking more in context of also creating safe spaces for young people who are, again, across boundaries of different identities, and with the idea being that at the end of these spaces, there is development of, there's deeper self-awareness, there's capacity building and opportunities to be able to build and nurture these cross-border relationships. And then there is also the ability to take stances and learn how to actually act on them in the real world and take that away. And like Vandita said, being able to, in that process, be able to form these worldviews, disagree, make informed decisions and choices and opinions. So, we call these fifth spaces, and what the way we define these spaces are experiences. They call fifth spaces only because we said, if you look at legitimately held spaces for young people, they're typically the four spaces of family, friends, career and career-related education, and certain leisure activities. And these are all adult sort of governed or societal norm governed. And what we try and create is have this fifth space, which, as Vandita also talked about, has the principle of co-creation and co-leadership. So it's not quote unquote adult run. It has to be developed together, whoever are the folks who are in that space, which means that who creates the agenda. The agenda cannot be created by one person. The co-creation and co-ownership, and that I think also in a lot of the conversations we had about economics that you talked about, that where is the power, who holds, who makes those decisions really determines whether it's a safe democratic space or not. If my voice is not part of the creation of the agenda, nothing else will really matter. Other than that, like I said, this is an experience. So to my mind, safe spaces are created and breached in every moment and every interaction. They're not static, they're dynamic. So I can go back to a space, but one interaction could feel immensely unsafe in that moment, but the resolution of it could perhaps also create a greater sense of safety in the longer run. But it is based on those interactions that the safety and the lack of safety can be felt. And therefore, how do you identify if you're in a safe space? So we talk about the feelings that you might be able to feel there. So do you feel a sense of love? Do you feel a sense of freedom? Do you feel a sense of growth? Do you feel a sense of ownership? And do you feel a sense of social hope? That's something better would come off it. And in terms of then, there are certain design principles that we hold dear. One was, of course, co-creation. We call it flowing. This is being created, and this is not just Brava. These are over 100 youth-led and youth-engaging organizations across the country who've come together to sort of put these principles together for the fifth space. It's called flowing. So, F is for feelings are being honored. Everyone's feelings are honored. There is leading together. There is ownership, and there are journeys of self to society. So the idea that the self is not in isolation from the society, and you cannot talk about yourself in isolation from the rest of the world. It will be created in your interaction with the world and vice versa. The ability to, and the willingness to take risks. So the safe space where you can make mistakes, where you can take the risk, you can try, you can experiment. There is inclusion. The now, the present, is as important as the future. So it's not as if you're only building for the future. the here and the now is equally important in how that's engaged with, and that it's grounded in reflection, which is reflection and action. It's not one or the other. So these are just some of the places which help, and the capacitating of the person who's facilitating the space is incredibly important, because that person has an added responsibility. The whole group does, but that person, in a sense, or the set of people have added responsibility to watch out and hold it, and to call out when the breaches are happening and have a process to sort of work through them and engage with them as well. And like Vandita said, there are many designs which are a part of it. It's also my ability as a facilitator. It's just not doing. So safe spaces are not just a doing activity, they're also a being space. So it has to be a transformative experience. If I haven't experienced a democratic space, for me to create it and live it, because I have to live those values and those principles. It could be done under a tree. That session can be held under a tree. It could be held in a nice hotel, but it will be determined by the feelings that it's generated and how it's experienced, or whether these principles have been brought into the place, so that there is no judgment and there's space for disagreement in a constructive way, and there's empathy and compassion. So I think these are some of the things I just sort of add to that for the safe spaces.
All right. Thank you so much, Neha and Vandita. And this is something I think we, as a team, sort of realized maybe a bit too late, because suddenly we had 80 people, and there was a need to look more inward and sort of focusing on what we're creating outside. So very important to us personally as well, all of the points you guys have mentioned. And maybe a slightly different track on community. I think something I mentioned at the beginning was how important it was to inspire people to action. And what we've seen with, for example, Bahujan Economics, is that their team, has been really fascinating in that respect. They kind of, Arushi, you guys kind of built a very large and supportive community in a matter of days, right? And I think maybe I'd like to hear a bit more about what do you think is important to allow that to happen, and sort of how do you create that buy-in with volunteers that do come in?
Great. Thank you so much, Vandita and Neha. It was really powerful to hear both of you talk about community building, and thanks, Karan, for bringing this up. I do want to begin by saying that it is true that the community was perhaps not built in a matter of days. I think it was sort of organizing when I was a student in Delhi, and then when Aditi, who is the founder of the group, she was a student in Delhi, and then engaging with sort of our cohort mates, our seniors and juniors, and then sort of passing it on to other students in the organization, in those institutions. And I think the common thread that was binding all of us was sort of the experiences that we shared in being in those institutions, which were harrowing, which were very tragic. They didn't have to be like that, but a lot of the students from the community faced discrimination. They were made fun of because their English was not as good as it was for other students from privileged communities, and so on. So I think it's kind of unfortunate, but true that it's sort of the experiences and organizing around those experiences over the years that sort of brought the community together and sort of makes it stick as well. I also want to say that I think at least for me, the beginning was when I was a student at the Delhi School of Economics, and this was the year 2016, when Rohit Vemula, a Dalit scholar at the University of Hyderabad, had passed away on account of institutional negligence in the University of Hyderabad. And that sort of really shook us to the core, reading Rohit Vemula's suicide letter. That really made us think, you know, it could be, who could it be next? Could it be our friends? Could it be, it could be anyone in our family. And I think that's when, at least for me, I started thinking about this question much more seriously, and got involved in a bunch of protest demonstrations or open meetings where we call all the faculty and all the students at Delhi School of Economics, and we said, come, let's talk about caste, because you won't acknowledge it, but it is a problem. So I definitely do want to preface everything I say with the fact that it's years of organizing and shared experiences that sort of brings the community together. I really like what Vandita said about, do people even know about how do you say sorry? And this is really complicated, because it's not like, it's not like I cursed at someone and I'm going to say sorry. It's historic oppression, and how do you say sorry for how do you apologize for something like that? Something like Soho pointed out that how does one apologize for colonial oppression, for instance? And in this case, how does one apologize for a history of caste oppression? And this is very important in an organization that has agreed to support, to receiving support from allies who typically happen to belong to upper caste groups. So I think that how do you apologize is a very important question in a setting where there is inherent inequality in who holds power and who does not hold power, and that is determined by caste. So that is something extremely important. The other thing I want to say is that yes, we are a community of people trying to improve representation in a specific field, which is economics, and we're trying to build a community to help people excel in very mainstream terms in this field. But I think at the same time, we're also a very political community, and that sort of stands at the heart of who we are. And by political, I don't mean to say that, we will not make the space welcoming for someone who does not identify themselves as Ambedkarite. But I do think that what is non-negotiable for us is that everyone has to believe in the annihilation of caste. I think we just have these basic core political values that I think, and we developed those after a lot of deliberation, a lot of infighting. But I think those we agreed upon were just non-negotiable. That this is where we will draw the line, and this is deeply political. And I think that also reflects in the kind of work, the kind of ventures we undertake. Like there is a group of people who are writing response notes to research papers that deeply affect the community. They're bringing in their own perspective, and I think they would be able to do that precisely because the community is a political one. And I think that also goes back to what was being discussed before as to how do we create institutions that outlast people. And I think there, at least our group thinks that uh, politics or a shared politics or a shared uh, common, I don't want to say ideology necessarily, but maybe it's just that, but definitely a shared perspective of what our world should look like. I think it's very important to build institutions that outlast the people that are currently here at this point. So yeah, I think I think I've spoken a lot already, but there's definitely a lot to discuss here, and I've just listening to the discussion here, I've learned a lot. I think the last thing I do want to mention is about the importance of workplace guidelines, which is complicated by the fact that we're all in different parts of the world, and we usually have our meetings on Zoom or whatever. But given the nature of our group, these workplace guidelines not only include anti-harassment, anti-discriminatory, anti-bullying policies, but also stuff like how do we provide internet connection to a volunteer who's say living with their family right now in the lockdown, but wants to volunteer for the organization and wants to work with us. So I think these are like really material problems as well. And we at Bahujan Economists, we have we have consulted some lawyers to write down a list of workplace guidelines that are of course applicable to us, but we're also providing them to organizations, think tanks, academic institutions that sort of work in research in economics, who hire RAs, who hire sort of field staff, quote unquote. And there is an inherent power dynamic because these people working at sort of the quote unquote lower level of the organization don't come from very privileged backgrounds typically. And we've specified exact guidelines, detailed guidelines of how you should be treating, for instance, field staff, for instance, the people collecting data on your behalf from in a village while, the researchers are, sorry.
It's all good. You're just on mute, Arushi. You can just unmute and start talking.
Yeah, my phone started ringing. Okay. But anyway, I think I'll end there. But yeah, I think it's worth emphasizing just the importance of having very clear workplace guidelines so that they can be followed and everyone knows if there is a grievance, how that is going to be addressed. So I think I'm just echoing that already, that has been already said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arushi. And I think I'll pick up on the shaping institutions bit in a while. But I think for Tseho, as you said, when I was first looking to start Rethinking Economics India, I did reach out to refer, because I think when we first joined, we heard a lot about another network in the Global South that had so much impact, that was able to sort of mobilize students, not only in their own university, but across Africa and beyond WITS. And I think I just really want to understand sort of your perspective on that. Has the ideas that have been mentioned so far really tie into that? Would you have anything else to add on how you've been able to make that possible, or you guys have made that possible?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you to the speakers before. I've actually learned so much. I've had so many notes just off of what you just said. And in terms of movement building, I think what Arushi just said was very true and is applicable to us as well. Having the shared experience, as I've said earlier, I just got a message that some of what I was saying was cut off. But I think it was just the moment where everyone started questioning this coloniality and coming together and saying we need to do something about this, right? And also in the context of South Africa, we've just received statistics from our statistics office that 75% of youth in the country are unemployed. So that's really big. It's actually shocking. And that's the expanded definition. And just like countrywide, I think our expanded unemployment rate is 35%. That's one of the highest in the world. So economy right now is not, there's poor growth, and that's also because of our history of having two different economies, etc. So I think it wasn't a difficult thing, and it isn't difficult to mobilize people around this thinking. People can see around them, economically there isn't much movement, and also the youth, the people who are supposed to be most active and contributing to society, are being left out. So it's not a difficult conversation to have, and it's also not difficult to bring other people in, right? That's the beauty. Well, I mean, obviously it's not a good situation, but the beauty of it is everyone can see from their households and their immediate reality that this is a conversation that they have to have. And I think with differ and its heterodox approach. We've tried to limit like the economics jargon. You know, I feel like economists try to make it a elite circle of only people who can speak economics should be able to speak in the of the economy, but opening it up and bringing in different kinds of thinkers and people in society has really helped us to speak about the economy in a non-exclusive way. And I think that's how you build a community that lasts, right? And also in terms of institutionalizing it, I think, yeah, spreading out its influence and showing the importance and to society is how we keep it together. And also just having repetitive, so keeping the same institutions in place. So I think the festival for us is something that has been very important, right? Because we all know that it happens once a year. So that's something to keep the community excited about, right? And yeah, just creating this space and making economics fun and accessible to the people around us. I think that's how we've been able to attract more people, to attract young people. This festival is really the most fun thing that we have, like art and culture. We have different speakers from everywhere. Well, I mean, I really enjoy it. So yeah, we've made economics fun and accessible. And I think that's how we start to build this community and keep it alive.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Sahil. I think while we're still on the topic of sort of mobilizing change and influencing beyond the organization we're part of, Ignacio, I mean, within the Rethinking Economics space, OPES is like fairly different in terms of being like an actual operational think tank. And how do you sort of see a role of that kind of organization in mobilizing change and getting young people to act, especially like the university space?
Okay, thank you for the question. Thank you for the previous answers. It was very interesting. For us, I mean, maybe we're kind of a think tank, but we have this strong, or at least we wanted to have this a strong connection with universities, because we realized how important are universities, not especially in the economic area, not only because of the academic production, because the academic production of course support the public policy that we don't agree mainly, but also in the very beginning years of the career, of the economic career, all the students produce and learn and is built like the common sense of the economics. So in the very beginning of the career, we have these strong ideas about what is the role of the market, what is the role of the state, and all that economists then are going to reproduce with a very narrow, with this, are going to reproduce this very narrow perspective of how to do economics. So what we really want to be focused is to change, or try to change this common sense. And why it's important, and why it's important in just this specific moment in Chile, is because, you know, a little more than 1 year ago, in the 2019, we experienced like this huge and massive protest that started with just a little of increase in the public transport prices. But it was the last point that make explode like everything, all the system, it was wrong, and all the people was tired of that system. So starting to that point, everything started to change, and now we decided to change the constitution. In just 2 weeks ago, we had the votation to decide who are going to write the constitution in a convention. So what we need now is to influence the constitutional debate, and that is how it's important to show our ideas. And we need, like, that's why I told in the beginning about the common sense of the student, because now we need different perspectives. We need to build a different model, and of course it are going to be something new. And we don't want it to make this maybe the same mistake that it has happened before in other countries, but we wanted to change, and we wanted to change mostly everything of the current model. We have to think of what are going to be the role of the state in the economy, very maybe basic thing, but very important. We need to think about what are going to be the role of the central bank, how we can incorporate gender dimension in the new economic model. So all of this topic we need to cover, and we need like new open mind economists who try to think about these ideas, and that's why we wanted to participate in the public debate in that kind of level.
Right. Thank you, Ignacio. I think some of the points you mentioned around shared ideas, right? That shared ideas need to be, and I think Arushi also mentioned a bit of this, and how those ideas form the center of community, of organizations that last. And I think Vandita also mentioned this in her opening statement around how some of these models are corporatized and really imported. And we had another speaker, Guppy from Decolonizing, I think, in the UK, who really brought up the topic of how it's hard to undertake the activity of founding while navigating these questions of power dynamics within your own team. And especially in sort of like a community enterprise that Rethinking Economics is meant to be, really a student-led, student-founded, student-learning community. I'd like to hear maybe from Soho and Vandita on what you think about this. Maybe you can start with Soho and then pass it on. But yeah.
Sorry, I missed the middle of that question a bit. Could you just repeat it, please?
Yeah. So I mean, we had another speaker, Guppy, who had spoken about how it's hard to undertake the action of founding while navigating the question of power dynamics in sort of within your teams, and it's more important in sort of a community enterprise like Rethinking Economics, where we're trying to look at sort of community-led action, student-led action that's really bottom up. And what are your thoughts on sort of that? Yeah.
I think I actually just sent a message to the panelists, to Liha and Vandita, about how they're speaking on safe spaces is something that the UCT REFA, I'm not sure how part of it and other REFAs have gone. We haven't really institutionalized or thought of really the safety aspect. I think we've taken it from as a given that we're all trying towards the same objective. And so we've just thought that the people in the space respect the core values of just communicate. Do you know what I mean? So the power dynamic seems to be a flat structure in our organization, even in terms of leadership and all of that, I think has been very flat structured. So the power dynamics in between us, I wouldn't say that that's something that really has been a problem for us in terms of students, but also interacting with civil society and other people and academics. I think that we haven't really had much of a challenge of power dynamics or power imbalances, because I think that the student-led space in South Africa has been one that has been present for a long time, that I think other movements and other work that came prior to REFA established a space where the student voice is very legitimate. And so I would say that there was that space for us already, but it had to be worked hard for, and that took different movements and different work. So yeah, that's what I would say. I hope if anyone's listening from South Africa that I haven't misrepresented that, but that would be my immediate thinking on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Karen.
I was about to say, Vandita, you can go ahead.
Just going to build off of that, again, we'll preface by saying, sometimes just things work and you're like, this theory works, but maybe it's just luck. I will draw upon, I studied leadership, organizing and action under Professor Marshall Ganz earlier this year virtually. And he has this beautiful model of organizing, where organizing is not just led to you, it doesn't just happen, right? He builds specific leadership practices that help decentralize and democratize organizing. And I think that's so incredibly important, because it's very easy to bring young people and say, oh, all of you are leaders and all of you can lead. But I have been taught to be a leader because I come from a lot of privileges. So I have been told, yes, you can speak up. It's okay to ask a question. It's okay to think differently. But for a lot of people who've never had that sort of exposure, leadership looks so different. I'm going to give a small example before I get to the actual question. I serve on an international board, and when I joined, I'm the youngest person. I was like, are you going to train us on how to be on the board? Because you're managing budgets of like $80 million. I've never even thought of that amount of money in my life. Or the impact is like across 40, 50 countries. And they said, it's an interesting point, but we've never thought about this before. And this speaks to the fact that who actually serves on these boards? It tends to be people already with a certain amount of institutional power. And I find that when we're not intentional, not just in our thought, coming to the question, but also in our action, while we might want everyone to develop shared power and shared leadership, it often becomes a few people who are able to develop it, because there's none of these traits are natural or by birth, right? It's just that some of us have had exposure to it and some of us just have not. So coming to the act of like, how do you create these bounded communities? How do you build this sort of decentralized system, if I'm getting the question correct, Karan? It's perfect.
Yes, yes.
I feel like something that is very important is intentionalizing and putting actions to where your intent is. So if you're saying that, okay, our intent is that it's going to be a collaborative, what are the ensuing actions after that? What does that mean? Do you have a rotational student council? Do you have a rotational council in general? What is your voting mechanism? How do you develop capacity in people to engage in the same way that perhaps the founding members do? So a bit of that. Second that I found really helpful is the Snowflake model of leadership. It's something I learned under Professor Marshall Ganz, and it's basically a model where, say, I, Karan, and Arushi are at the center, right? And then we have a second layer of leadership and a third layer of leadership. But these are just functional layers. So hierarchy becomes merely functional, and it is not a representative of where power is situated. And this model, I will put the name in chat in a bit. This model allows for power and decision-making to flow from the center to the edges and from the edges to the center. So it's more about hierarchy for getting work done rather than hierarchy for how power is controlled and managed. And to intentionally set up such a leadership structure is one way that comes to mind of doing it. I'm a lawyer, so I always think like put things down in writing, like put down what your law is, right? Like what policy governs your organization? What policy ensures that everyone is heard? Even what Arushi said, right? Like internet access, device access. I remember when I was 19, I think I was interning somewhere. Then I started working there and they said, oh, everyone has a laptop. And this is an NGO. And I was like, but I don't have a laptop. I couldn't afford one then. I used to rent a laptop for 1,000 rupees a month. And I was like, what seems so natural to you is not so natural to me. So to put down like what your actions will be to ensure people are included, people are heard. And over time, so that it doesn't become individual based, right? Like maybe today I'm a benevolent leader and I want to include people, but I will leave at some point, maybe. And then how do we ensure that systems are not dependent on people and their whims and fancies? So I find that policies work really well for that. And then third, something I would definitely recommend is no one person should create this policy or principles. It has to be something that is co-created, because when it's co-created, there's such an automatic buy-in, because if the six of us create something together, then that means we commit to it automatically, right? From the time we create it. And I've done that at One Future Collective too, and it's been incredibly powerful, because now every time a new person joins, I don't even have to talk to them about values. Everyone's like, oh, these are our 10 values, and this is what it means. And it's always very collective. I've never had someone at OFC say, oh, OFC does this, or this person does this. It's always we do it. This is how our organization works. From an intern to a volunteer to the CXO, everyone has the same say. Everyone is involved across board in substantive work. So strategy work, work that lays our foundation. And we also have a very clear decision-making matrix that allows people to take, day-to-day calls by themselves. You can't check in with everyone for every single thing. And then to also I'll take a last 30 seconds. How do you move this to making it radical? Would you, if you were a registered entity, would you be okay making sure that all your employees are part owners of the entity, be it a nonprofit otherwise? Like if you run a nonprofit, why do you have employees? Why is everyone not a co-owner? Because they're all building it together, right? Everyone's labor has equal value, but you're profiting off the surplus value of labor, which you're not paying for. And the value of labor can be economic, but it can also be social capital, right? So many times people only want to talk to me. They don't want to talk to other people from my organization. That is how social capital accumulates as well. Yes, so moving from collective to radical is something I want you to push your thinking towards. Collective we can do today, right? We can start doing it. But what does it mean to radically push money, ownership, social capital into the hands of every person? It requires a lot of letting go of your want to be a hero. Yeah, it's been a struggle for me too, but I will stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. I think a lot of those points are going to be in our notes for next steps. And I think you did mention a bit about how do we operationalize this? How is it that we create a system in which this perpetuates within even after the founding team leaves and so on and so forth. And I think, given that Prava has been in the space, like you mentioned, for 28 years now, I don't know if Neha, you'd want to sort of shed light on certain ideas that you feel are important when making these kind of initiatives very long-term and self-sustaining.
Yeah, I mean, I think
big questions, but yeah.
No, I'm just really enjoying the conversation, and I think a lot of ground has been actually covered by Pochepu and Vandita. And I think I'll just add to that. I think it also starts with the vision, for me. I think that oftentimes what happens is that entities have a purpose and a vision which is outward looking, which is about the change we want to bring in the world. And I think it's also about, do we have conversations and an understanding of what is our internal facing vision? So who do we wish to be, and how do we wish to be doing this? And are we reviewing that as well? Are we, because I think that's also where these questions get picked up, So, when we talk about the fifth space feelings, it's not the same for everyone. Now, what makes me feel freedom may not necessarily make the other person feel freedom. And that dialogue and those conversations and repeated conversations, actually, the idea of how the culture is created actually through conversations is very, very important. Creating the time to have good designed conversations where every person can share and put their perspective forward, which then again comes back to, is there a safe space? And which may mean that you may not be having all the conversations in one group. It requires for people to make the effort to sometimes have those conversations one-on-one, to understand, would they feel comfortable bringing it in? Is there another method that needs to be done? Are there other pegs, that need to be used so that people can share? Do we have follow-ups to those? So, there is a time that needs to be set aside, and it needs to be part of a certain group of people or everybody's roles as well. And therein sometimes lies the tension, because when you're a funded organization and you're trying to raise resources as well, there are people who sort of, would want you on a program. And this somehow seems to get missed as part of the fact that if you want to create change in the world, then this is as much a part of setting the ground for that. So I think that creating that and in some senses protecting that, making sure that we have somebody watching that and coming back to it is very important. And like in Prava, we have a space called Seed and Soil, and these are opt-in spaces. Person who's a day old and a person who's been there for 20 years can all opt in to be a part of it. And the key idea of this group is really to take ownership of the internal facing space and to flag and say, okay, this we think we're doing well on, this is not feeling the same. So let's talk about it. Let's bring up the difficult issues that are coming up. Or I felt that here was a breach. I feel like we're not talking about this, this is an agenda that needs to happen. And then co-creating what we need to do, like what Vandita said, it's not about just conversations for the sake of conversation. If conversations are not followed by action, if we are not following through on it through intentional conscious action, and then reviewing that action and seeing and course correcting along the way and saying, listen, has this really made that difference happen? It won't work. And sometimes what it means is because obviously this is more difficult where there are paradoxes where you want to try and have your cake and eat it too, and all of us want to do that. We want both ends, and we must hold both ends. It's important to sometimes take really difficult decisions and let go, by also mapping and saying these could be the potential impact, and are we okay with that? Are we all seeing it? Are you seeing something that I'm not seeing? And preparing ourselves as a system to be able to do that becomes very critical. I think the other thing which has really helped us, and just to share, like, so when I took over the leadership at Prava years ago, I was the first non-founder CEO, but I was also, it went like, somebody was 50 years old, and then it went to somebody who was 28 years old. And there was like a huge difference. And what was wonderful was there was, of course, a lot of hand-holding and a lot of mentoring. But what was also important for us was to therefore have strategic decision-making groups where there was, sort of all of us were coming together and talking about it. So, we had board members, we had people that, the Seed and Soil group had elected and said, we'll have these 2-3 folks who are part of it, and then some of us who adopted it. And we would talk about decisions, including what projects we'll say yes to and no to. And I remember that there was huge money that we were 100% going to get. And then when we went into the strategic decision-making group, one of the youngest persons there sort of said, but hang on, when we're looking at their track record, this particular company's track record, are we sure we want to go down that route? And it just changed the course of the conversation. Now, those are all recorded, those are all learned. We talk about the values there, and then that passes on through intentional action. So us sort of realigning through those conversations, through processes. Shared leadership does not happen just by working relationships. It also happens through building personal equations. Because I need to feel like I want to make the effort to walk in your rhythm, and you need to be able to feel like you want to make the effort to walk in my rhythm. And that then sort of allows us to also call out, hold that ownership, and make that happen. So I think creating those spaces, making sure that that happens, I think also calling out breaches in a way which is empowering. I think the idea not being to make anybody defensive, but the idea being that we all need to sort of take ownership for resolving conflicts, not brushing them under the carpet, and building from there, and saying sorry, as Vandita also said. I think the apologies play such a huge role. Apologies and gratitude, saying thank you, recognizing people, appreciating what they've brought to the table, along with, of course, how we can see them sort of work on both their areas of strength and improvement. But I think that framework and remembering that we're human. I mean, development sector was all about people centricity. It cannot be about system centricity. The system has to serve, the processes have to serve, the communities that we're part of and the purpose that we're looking at.
All right. Thank you, Neha. And I think I'd also like to tell the audience that I'm going to be extending this for another 5 to 6 minutes because I really want to, I think, squeeze in a couple of questions. And while we're talking about this strategy and coming up with the vision, right, of the organization, and I think a good place to mention is how I think this question is maybe first for Arushi and then Vandita, because we've talked about this a lot, on how does your organization attempt to sort of clarify the impact that you want and the path to getting there. And I also like to say, maybe if you can keep answers a bit short and then we can squeeze in the last one. But yeah, go ahead, Arushi.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one that I may not have the best answer to right now, because I think it's exactly something that we're negotiating, and we have been negotiating for the last 1 year. because different people have different ideas about how to achieve the objectives of the organization. Like Neha mentioned, for instance, like who are we taking money from? And again, because we are an organization that emphasizes on shared politics, we do want to take money from if we have to take money from someone, we would want to take money from an organization that would understand our politics. Even when we are accepting support from allies, we make some things very clear, like to the mentors who come from typically more privileged groups. We send them an email saying, these are our values, this is sort of our politics, and you're not here for charity, and so please do not treat us or our members as being the receivers of charity. And this is mentorship that you're doing as part of building a community. So I think like we do it's not easy, because I think Vandita said what's a safe space for someone is a very uncomfortable space for someone else. And we run into that all the time, just because the nature of our organizing is identity based, and identities that have historically seen gross injustices and um, power power play. So I think, yeah, I would, just to keep it short, I would say that we don't have the answer to that right now, but what we try to do is that make it clear as much as possible, send out emails, and encourage people to talk to us one-on-one, or even have weekly group meetings where all of this is specified in particular, that it's just not negotiable, that a member of ours is made to feel inferior. Those are things that we just keep dropping again and again on Twitter, on email, on calls, or whatever. And I think we still might be falling short of it, but yeah, it's difficult.
I thought I'll wait and let Karan follow me, but I will go ahead. So if I understand correctly, it's how do we decide impact areas and how do we streamline that work, right, Karan?
Yeah, because we've talked about the theory of change a bunch of times. So, yeah.
For sure. So I'll be very honest, we're a 3-year-old organization and we're young and we want to do everything. And it's more difficult to say no than it is to say yes, because I mean, we work on social justice, right? So there is nothing in the world that does not come under social justice till you don't define that more clearly. And my team and I have a tendency to take broader definitions when it suits our purpose. So it's not been a good process. It's not been an easy process. But what we've realized is, and this is a conversation I had with Vishal, and I have to credit him from Dream a Dream. And he's the first person who made me feel like it's okay to not know exactly how you're going to do things, as long as you know what is your why. As long as your why and your eventual vision is the same, it is in fact a good thing for your how to change as needed, right? It would just not be smart of my organization to have the same how before and after the pandemic. And trust me, like 2 years back, Vandita would be like, oh my God, we're crashing and burning because we've changed our entire like how. But now I'm like, look, we were able to streamline, course correct, and serve our communities better. So I think that is one strong thing for me. Of course, we I'm forgetting the word. We just sort of create boundaries by saying these are thematic focus areas for us for say the next 5 years. We stopped planning for 10 years after the pandemic. We plan for 2 to 3 years now only. So we put down like some thematic areas. We've built strategic goals. We've built certain sub-strategic goals. And honestly, a lot more honesty within the team about, do you want to do this because you feel like you want to do this, or does it tie into our vision? And that has helped, because sometimes you want to do things that don't tie into the vision, but they can be important for community. They can be important for your team, which is also a community. And it's okay to have that, a little bit of like flexibility around that. So that is one in terms of how we decide impact areas. And second, just building off of what Arushi shared as well, again, going to my lawyer mindset. So we write our values into the contract. So into the contract, we're like, we won't work for you, we work with you. A lot of contracts will talk about what if my team member harasses their employee, what happens then? I'm like, what happens if your team member harasses my employee? Right? Like things like that. Like really, it's been a battle because you will notice that most people you work with follow standardized templates for like contracts, for consultancies, for projects, for everything. Standardized templates are often what are white people templates. They are not templates that accommodate the needs of every person. And we negotiate contracts, and my team is half my team is lawyers, and every partner is so concerned when we negotiate what they believe are standard clauses in an agreement. Most clauses are not standard. I mean, it's basically a contract between both of you. You decide half of what has to be put down. Even things like jurisdiction, where will the case be heard if it comes up. So I find that is very effective because values and all are great, but what if they don't listen to you? What if they're the ones giving you money? So once it's into the contract, I find that it becomes a lot more actionable, and it's also accountable to you. So as an organization, I also can't violate that if I'm tempted by the money the partner is offering, because my contract says that I can't do it too. So I find that is a little helpful in terms of how you, like Karan said, right? How do you operationalize all of these intentions, especially when it's external? When it's internal and with your community, you will develop systems and checks and mechanisms over time. But when you're working with people for the first time, it's always going to be a renegotiation process. And initially it would really annoy me, but now I try to think of it as a learning process itself. Yes, that's it.
Thank you. And yeah, I thought I'd let you go without me calling you out. And I'm sorry, Ignacio, I had more questions for you, but I think we're out of time. So I think I'd just like to ask everyone for a bit of a closing statement. And for that, I mean, my question really is, what gives you hope? What would you like to say to other people that want to start something new? And I think we can start with Ignacio, and then you just nominate the next person you'd want to speak.
Okay, so I think it's not an easy question. It's not easy to think of how to motivate. Even like so many times we feel like unmotivated sometimes. Sometimes you put like so much work, so much time, and maybe you don't see any change so far. So what I think from my perspective is important is just to have the conviction that what is your main goal, and share that conviction with the others. When you have a collective action, I think this is the most important, and this is the most important support that you are going to have in order to don't feel unmotivated, because change that you are looking for will arrive and you will reach eventually. Maybe it doesn't matter if you will never see the change. Maybe that is not so motivated, but maybe you never see the change. But it's not. But what is most important thing is to understand that this political framework, this society won't be the same forever, and will change in some point. And everything that we are doing, everything we are doing, will produce something. And what is important is to do it with others, is to listen with others, is to work with other organizations, to look for this collective action. I think this is the most important part, is to look, is to share the thing that we are doing, is to talk with others, until in some point we're going to start to feel and to see like these small changes. So this is my main close. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you very much for all your presentation and interesting points.
Thank you, Ignacio. Do you want to sort of nominate the next person?
Yeah, that's true. So I will nominate to Arushi. Yeah.
Thanks, Ignacio. Also wanted to say I'm really excited by the work that Opus is doing in Chile. I have a friend, who's my cohort at Brown who works with Opus, and it's very exciting what you have been able to achieve. And congratulations on the new constitution soon, hopefully. Yeah, and I think for closing, I would just like to say what gives hope is what we've been talking about. It's community, and I feel like it's being in this profession can be very disheartening for people who are in this profession, especially if you're not a white man. I think it's been so inspiring to see these wonderful women, wonderful men also, but wonderful Dalit Bahujan women who I've been interacting with for the last so many years. And I think what gives me hope is seeing them excel, seeing them voicing what they think is important. Um, and I think it's been representation and community is the way forward. Yeah. And I would nominate Toho.
Great, thank you for that. Can I actually just say one thing that has come out from this talk that I realized RIFA has a challenge with, and I think that Rain might have that challenge as well. That RIFA is rethinking economics for Africa, right? So the scope is so large. It's not just South Africa, it's Africa, right? So we spend so much time trying to cover ground in South Africa, trying to connect with other people everywhere. That I think what Bandita and Mika were talking about is that we've missed out on the small nuance of like intention of creating safe spaces, of things like that, right? Because we've just been so consumed with getting bigger. So hopefully that doesn't happen with Rain as well. Just some advice to you. And also, yeah, just this thinking of trying to zero it down onto one location. I think that you guys are already in a better place. And yeah, just making sure that the institution survives the core people who started it. That's some really good learnings that I got from all of this, because actually, thank you very much for that. And I think I have a lot of wisdom to take back to RIFA as well, even though we have been operating for slightly longer. So in terms of what motivates me, I would say this community of other people who are working to make the world a better place. It sounds so idealistic, but it is the work that we're doing. And often when you look at your peers who are in corporate or who are really just who are like over this, right? Over trying to help society, right? And who think that you can put your skills to better use and monetize them in a way that doesn't give back to the community. I think that to see other people elsewhere, other young people doing the work is very important. Yeah, and also just the RIFA community keeps me going, keeps me motivated. That the youth of our country, despite the challenges that we have, we really do believe that we can make a difference and change the trajectory of our country. And we're not just hopeless, we really do see ourselves in the future and do see a better future for ourselves. And that's what keeps me motivated in this space, just as a person. And yeah, keeps me motivated and encouraged. So thank you so much for having me here. I've learned so much. I have so much to take back to RIFA. Also, just one last thing, in terms of rethinking economics, the international structure, there are a lot of resources like guidelines to how meetings should be held, as we've discussed, right? There are those things in place. So there have been other groups that have done the work already. So just look into it before, like don't try to reinvent the wheel, I'd say, because other people have done the work as well. So good luck on your journey, and thank you for this time on this platform.
Thank you.
And
Maybe
I
Neha?
nominate.
Cool.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that works. There's
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Neha.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I think in terms of what gives me hope, very frankly, it's been the young people, especially through the pandemic. Just the sort of work that a lot of young people have been doing at the front lines, at the back ends, volunteering, going out. We have the change rooms community, which are young social entrepreneurs, very much like Vandita. The sort of resilience, many of them have been on shoestring budgets. They were about to expand, and then the pandemic hit, and then they sort of finally got over the first wave and were about to expand or do other things, and then again the pandemic hit. So it's not been easy, but the way they have shown up for their communities, for each other, and dealt with things. And here's where I want to use something that I heard on a panel that OFC had done. The way they've been able to convert their sort of grief and their anger and their frustration into compassionate action, I think has been quite. Yeah. I mean, the world's much more complex than when I was a young person. I think they've really dealt so beautifully, as best as they could, I think, with the cards that are there. So that gives me hope. And I think in terms of what would I say to the others, I think I would certainly say what Ignacio said. I think have a why, have a clear why. If you don't have a clear why, then don't need to start up something just for the sake of starting up. Go out, experience other spaces, learn, find what is that point of passion, and then come into it. Don't just start for the sake of starting up. There's much good work which needs fantastic people in it, and entrepreneurs are as needed as entrepreneurs are. I think the other one I would say is build communities. You cannot do it on your own, and there are no prizes. There is no race that you're going to win. This world is not changing tomorrow, and certainly the issues are going to keep becoming complex and will show up in different ways. The stronger your community, the stronger your relationships, and relationships across stakeholders, across boundaries of identities, the more you will learn, the more supported you will be, and be open and open yourself up to being challenged and being critiqued. Do not surround yourself with people who will say yes to you and will agree with you, because then we will never grow. And as a society, we'll be the poorer for it. So I think just make sure that you're going out and bringing that community in. Also, just recognize and share power. Recognize when you have the power, and be able to witness it and share it. Not don't take the easy way out to sort of say no, but I never claimed it. I think it's important. It's important that we recognize the privileges we have, and might have been a challenge to get there, but when you have it, then how do you share it back? I think the other part of it is that the world today specifically wants simplistic solutions, wants quick solutions to issues like the ones that Arushi is engaging with, or the ones that Vandita is engaging with. These are complex issues which have a history, which have years and years of systemic and structural oppression. To believe that you will come up with a simplistic product to deal with it is doing great disservice to what one could bring to the table. So just really not getting pulled into the marketing instant gratification world, and recognizing there could be simple ways, but they will require effort, and they don't have to be simplistic. And it's okay to say that there is a complex issue at play. And I think to understand and respect the fact that there is complexity, which is at play and which will take time. And I think the last one, and then I'm done. I think always, I would say, pay it forward. Be authentic and pay it forward. I think we all stand on each other's shoulders. And I think that the greatest wealth for me has been through paying it forward, because I've always found that people that I think I'm paying it forward to are actually helping me learn and grow in so many different ways. So I think that's me. And Vandita, over to you.
I'm just going to say that I agree with everything that everyone said. Something different that gives me a lot of hope is words. I've always been someone who's found a lot of hope in reading something that someone in another continent or someone 200 years back wrote, and it still feels relevant, right? So I'm going to share something in chat. I'm not religious, but this is a quote that keeps me going on days where I feel like, why am I doing this, right? Like, what is the purpose? Not to be nihilistic, but once we go away, how does any of this matter? So this really centers me, and I hope it centers you too. That's all from me, Karan.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone on the panel today, and for everything that you've given to us. We'll definitely continue a bunch of the conversation that's happening in the chat, and I'll send that over to mail to all of you. And I want to thank all the attendees for joining us today, and keep in touch. Follow us on Instagram. But I think that's about it. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much,
Thanks so
everyone.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.